that the perception from outside, it's seen to be that we are as equally concerned about the regions as we are about what happens in London. And, you know, I take Alex's point about S4CS to heart, because I'm very aware of it. I'm also aware of what happens regionally too. But I'm going to ask Sarah to give you more substance to that answer, because she's, I think they will have been in part of in getting ready for the consultation process within the department, may already have been through these questions.
So I mean, I don't actually have very much to add to the Secretary of State's response on remit. It's clear that we're not looking it's not about removing the remit of Channel 4, it's about looking at what that remit is. That includes regional presence, and were ministers to make a decision to go ahead with a privatisation option for Channel 4, then obviously we would need to work through the process of what obligations would be placed on the channel, and what whether any changes would be made to its remit in that process. Clearly, we would also have to look very closely at the value to the taxpayer, and obviously I would have particular duties as accounting officer on that, in assessing the nature of the remit with which we would privatise Channel 4, and assuring ourselves that any sale were value for money for the taxpayer.
Thank you. Steve Bryan.
Hello, Secretary of State.
Never thought you'd say those words, did you, Steve?
Oh, indeed. I just did. There are many words I never thought I'd say, like Spurs win the league.
Never will.
I just said them, but I'll never say them again. Secretary of State, do you think that privatisation of Channel 4 is more or less likely in the changeover from the previous incumbent of your position to yours?
I'm not going to answer that question,
okay,
because I can't give you an answer, because I haven't made a decision.
Is there a difference?
And actually, I don't really know what the position or the thoughts of previous incumbents was with regard to Channel 4. I've got no idea, really. So I don't know. I haven't.
Is there a difference between Channel 4, so produces incredible drama like It's a Sin, which is one of the most downloaded programmes in British history, an amazing piece of work. Is there a difference between that Channel 4 and Channel 4 News?
Well, there's a difference between, Downton Abbey and News at 10. There's a difference between Strictly and BBC News. So, the two completely different outputs and different content with an editorial team, with different editorial teams.
You know why I'm asking, because the criticism of Channel 4 is
mainly
that Channel 4 News is the Guardian on television. And, when was the last time you appeared on Channel 4 News? When was the last time any of you, the current cabinet, appeared on Channel 4 News? Does Channel 4 News cloud the judgment of the whole channel?
So, interestingly, Cathy Newman has asked me numerous times to appear on Channel 4 News. I've just chosen not to. So I choose not to appear on news, but that's my personal choice. So it's not like I haven't been asked. I have been asked. I just don't like doing news.
What sits behind that personal choice? Because clearly, I
don't do any news. So
right,
unless I'm absolutely forced to. So
I understand that.
Interesting. Then wider on public service broadcasting, and it was a weighty piece of work, and I would encourage you to look at it if you can. What are your ambitions for the wider public service broadcasting? The wider whole idea of public sector broadcasting, the idea that my constituents and your constituents can be sent to prison for not paying a licence fee. In a multi-channel, multimedia, diverse media and entertainment market, where one part of that market is taxed. We're taxed to pay for it. Now, to my children who are a lot younger than yours, is that, what's the future of public service broadcasting in your mind?
Yeah. So you're talking about the BBC licence fee, and you're talking about the whole issue around decriminalisation, which again was a decision which took place before I arrived in post. And I think you've also caught in that question the renege or the U-turn on over 75s, not on pensions credit, not paying for the licence fee. So just to kind of like siphon out the BBC issues from your question, my overarching answer is public service broadcasting in the future, in the changing digital landscape that we're in at the moment, is up for review. Was I disappointed? Am I hugely disappointed in the decision regarding over 75s on pension credits and the licence fee? Absolutely. I'm very disappointed. But the decisions on that can't be made until charter renewal in 2027. Mid-term review discussions will begin in the spring of next year, I believe, very soon. But of course, the mid-term review is about the kind of the regulatory framework and other issues which govern the BBC. But we don't have an opportunity to look at the future of BBC broadcasting until 2027, when the charter review comes up for renewal, although the discussions will take place before then. So I think between now and 2027, there will be that landscape that we talk about that we can't see at the moment. We're just working on what's coming down the line at us. We're working, on gigabit and other means of people being able to get technology into their homes much faster and with much more ease. And who will use that and what will they use it for in terms of entertainment? These are quite kind of ethereal conversations that we're having at the moment, because it's something we can't see, but it's something that we know that the tech world must be working on in terms of entertainment. And Netflix is just an example, an early example of where that may go. And I think it's quite serendipitous that the charter renewal doesn't come through till 2027, because I think by then we will be in a place where we'll have a much clearer view of what the future looks like for public service broadcasting. At the moment, we're kind of on the foothills of how does that look? How is it going to change? But I think we'd all could be accused of being dinosaurs if we said here and now it isn't going to change and everybody can just carry on doing what they're doing and they're all going to be fine, because everybody is going to carry on going into their house and switching on to news at 6 on BBC or whatever it is on a news at 7. I think if we all said that, we could accuse of being dinosaurs, frankly, because we know that there are huge changes coming.
So, were you disappointed on decriminalisation decision that the government
Well, that happened before I arrived in the department.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Would you make the same decision?
We have. I mean, the issues.
Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Would you make the same decision?
I would think very seriously about making a decision like that, frankly. So.
What's your personal view?
I think very seriously about before I came to that decision.
Yeah, I mean,
there are. I'm going to ask Sarah to nuance this, because there are very good, and the department just didn't take that decision, I don't think, lightly. I think there was a huge amount of soul searching before that decision was taken. I think sometimes it might take a degree of leadership to probe and push a bit further on things to perhaps reach a different outcome. But Sarah, I'm going to ask you to give the history.
I mean, Sarah come in just a second, but the reason I'm sort of very rudely cutting Sarah out is I'm just sort of proffering to dig into your mind, Secretary of State, about the future of the whole concept of public service broadcasting. There are some who say it is an anathema. It is an anathema now, let alone in 6 years' time. There are some who say we should leave it alone and put our fingers in the ears and leave it alone, which is what you're saying we can't do, and I would agree with you. And I'm just wondering, in the unlikely event that you are Secretary of State in 6 years' time, bearing in mind you are the 10th in 10 years, there is a churn within this role, that is a matter of fact. I just wonder where your mind is between those two positions, anathema, finger in ears. Where would you say you are?
Again, I would just repeat what I've already said. I think we're at the foothills of change. I think that gigabit broadband is going to open up the up-and 5G, and actually we're even moving on, already discussing moving on further, into supercomputing and moving even further up than gigabit. And I think that just opens up massive opportunities for what people can have streaming down into their homes. And there will be tech entertainment companies now that will be working right now on how they maximise what is going to be national gigabit broadband coverage, how they're going to maximise that, how they're going to make money from it in terms of producing content to be streamed into people's homes. We're at the foothills of that, as I've said. We can't see what it's going to look like, but we know we're putting the infrastructure in place, and therefore it's, I would say, 99% likely to happen. I'd be very surprised if it didn't.
Yeah.
And within that context, part of it is, right, we need to tread carefully and see what's happening, but the other part is we need to look at public service broadcasting. How is it going to compete, and how is it going to survive in that future environment?
Thank you. Sarah, I didn't mean to cut you out.
No,
but
that's
please,
fine.
Please do,
I mean,
please do.
all I'd say is to underline the fact that obviously we conducted a review on decriminalisation of the licence fee, and it remains open to ministers to take to decide to proceed with that. But as the Secretary of State set out, the actual kind of fundamental changes to the licence fee are not possible until the point of charter review in 2027.
Steve, you got more questions?
Yeah, I just while I've got the floor, because time is tight, I just wondered if I could ask you, Secretary of State, the Brit Awards, which I attended this year and last, made an announcement yesterday that they're no longer, for next year, going to be doing Best Male, Best Female. I wonder if you had a view on that. There's a clear read across there, isn't there, to the BAFTAs, to the Oscars? You know, should there be Best Actor, Best Actress? What's your view on that award decision by the Brit Awards yesterday?
I think that's so I have to say it's the first I'm aware of it, but I think it sounds quite a sad decision. I'm very aware of the fact that I would like to see how that would work in terms of fair gender representation. That, you know, the same.
The argument that they gave is that it excludes non-binary artists,
Smith.
and therefore for next year they will just have the one category. They'll combine them.
Yeah. So again, I can't give an opinion on that because it's the first. You know,
Right.
Hearing it from you is the first I've heard about it. But I would be, you know. Women have been used for a very long time to being, you know, if you wanted to look at, you know, who used to win awards for novels and many things in the past, you know, men are always dominated, and my concern would be that women weren't fairly represented moving forward. So I would just be concerned on the gender balance issue, and that whereas we know we're going to get best female artist, best female producer, best female, you know, whatever, I'd be concerned that in the future women weren't fairly represented in those awards.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chair.
Secretary of State, do you recognise, as Mr Whittingdale said in front of us at his last hearing with us, that the decision to row back on super gigabit broadband target basically effectively means that the licence fee is here to stay for the long term, because you can't turn off the licence fee because you haven't got not everyone will be able to receive super gigabit broadband capable broadcast?
So I don't know when Mr Whittingdale gave evidence, but as you know, we were on 9% gigabit rollout 2 years ago. We're now past the 60% mark last Monday. We are moving very fast. We've just procured a whole new tranche. I think it's 5 million homes to move out the next section now. We're moving very, very quickly.
Not going to be the target though. 2025, 100% is not going to be met. That's been written to the floor.
I would not say that. I would not agree with you. So there are things happening both in tech-wise, in terms of what's happening in Open RAN, 5G, and lots of areas, which mean that, you know, that tough 15% of people living on top of, you know, a hill farm in the Dales somewhere, and in a peak in Scotland or Wales or on top of Snowdon, wherever it is, that those people aren't going to be able to have it. Actually, I think, you know, you're talking about 2025. Again, I say things are moving very quickly. I was interested to see what happens in Switzerland, where, of course, the vast majority of homes are remote and on a very undulating geographical landscape. That what they have available in Switzerland, which is, you know, again, they have 85% rollout. So if they can do it...
Lucky Switzerland. But it's not about effectively...
Well, it's how it's delivered. And the technology is changing very rapidly as to how we can deliver. So at the moment... And actually, can I just say, I think it's really important to this point to say, because not a lot of people know this, but in the Peak District, right today, 5 individuals in 5 rooms in one house, as a result of superfast broadband, can download 5 Netflix movies at once in the Peak District. So I think it's important, actually, to talk about where we are and the capability people do have, and we're at 92%? 97% of the country on superfast broadband. And so that's quite a lot of capability people have going into their homes. In fact, what people say is that they can't actually use the whole width of their superfast broadband. But of course, what gigabit is important to is the future. It's important to the 5G network. It's important to that landscape that we were talking about what tech companies can do with that capability. So, you know, where I live, my village has a gigabit capability. There's only one person in the village who's signed up to it, who is a graphic designer. So no one else in the rest of us are all using superfast broadband. So, of course, I will be signing up very soon. But everybody else is using superfast broadband. So I think it's important to talk about what we have at the moment and the capability people have in their homes, which is 95% of the country, superfast broadband. And I would challenge, it's a pretty dysfunctional family that wants to download 5 Netflix movies in 5 different rooms. But that's the ability people have today.
Just to row back 2 minutes, if I may, are you recommitting the government to the 100% target?
So the target is 85% coverage.
No, that's the election target was 100%, and then it was effectively then cut to 85%.
That is our ambition.
It's your ambition, okay.
Our ambition.
Because you did say that you were wrong and that actually you thought there were 100%.
No, it's our ambition to have gigabit broadband in as many homes as possible, as fast as possible. That is our ambition. We are, of course, hampered by the number of hands we can get into shovels and the number of skilled people we can have with telecommunication skills. In fact, I think Minister Lopez recently went to visit a new training school. I think I'm opening a new training school. We are opening training. Providers are opening training schools as fast as they can to get people in to skill them up on the telecommunication skills. Getting people on shovels to actually put the trenches in the ground. That's where it's not that we can't go fast enough, it's that the workforce to be able to deliver gigabit broadband across the country to 100% of homes is one of the issues, as well as the geographical location of some of the homes. So it isn't that the government doesn't want to get 100% broadband.
But we promised it. It was an election promise. Okay. Julie Elliott.
Thank you. And I just want to comment on that. Please don't forget dark spots in city centres where it is not all just rural uphills where people aren't connected. In this building, for instance, we don't have brilliant connectivity.
Yeah, and actually in some blocks of flats that are owned by, where a landlord is in the Cayman Islands and, the provider's trying to get in and not getting a response.
Industrial estates, private...
But we're doing something about that. That's
Please don't lose sight of it. I want to go back to public service broadcasting, and particularly Channel 4. Hugely successful, profitable company. If the decision is made to privatise, how are you concerned, or is the department concerned about some of the commitments to public service broadcasting, loss-making programming such as news and current affairs? Is there any concern as to how that will be kept if it is privatised?
I haven't even evaluated that because I haven't made a decision.
But it's not about making the decision, it's about how do you...
Well, no, I haven't actually done... So I'm waiting for the consultation to close, and I'm waiting... Well, it's closed. I'm waiting for the evaluation of the consultation, which will be given to me in a report. I'm waiting till I've got that evidence, and I'm waiting till I've taken other evidence, which includes your report in detail. I'm waiting till I have all of that information before me, and as part of that evaluation, that will be considered because that will go into the decision-making mix.
So there's a couple of other things that if the decision is to privatise, how will you ensure that if Channel 4 is sold or privatised in whatever form it's done, then 2 years down the line, it's sold on again. How will you make sure that commitments to public service broadcasting are kept?
Well, I'll ask Sarah to answer that question because I haven't got to that point of evaluating that, but I'll ask Sarah.
This goes back to the answer that the Secretary of State gave earlier about the remit of Channel 4 and obligations that we would place on any purchaser, which would obviously also,
it's a purchaser
but
one
would
down
also
the line.
kind of depending on how you put those obligations on, they also follow on to any future purchaser of Channel 4. So the remit of the broadcaster is the issue, and as I said earlier, this is not, I think ministers have been clear, it's not about removing the remit, it may be about reviewing it.
And would that be, if you go down that line, will the government ensure that commitments to public service broadcasting will be maintained, whoever owns it, 1 sale on, 2 sale on, 50 sales on,
So
if we look at privatised
ministers have been clear that their intention is that Channel 4 is sold as a public service broadcaster, so that's what the obligations would need to make clear.
And if we look at the numbers of, we've talked a lot about regional programming in Wales, but there's actually also a lot of jobs being moved to the north of England, to around the Leeds area in particular. What commitments will the government be looking for if privatisation happens to keep those jobs in those areas?
So again, that's a hypothetical question for me because I haven't got to that point yet.
You haven't got to the point of making the decision.
No, I haven't got to the point of waiting for the report from the consultation, looking at the evidence, reading the Select Committee's report, speaking to many organisations and people involved, and then we will that will be part of the evaluation process, and it will be fully considered, and the impact of privatisation will be considered in the context of the move to Leeds and what's happening in Leeds, and that's obviously a very important issue, because what is also important to me is the fact that it has moved to Leeds and it is out in the regions and it's not in London, so that's an important consideration, but it's not one
still
that
down south, but we'll let that off.
to you. Up north to me.
So you will consider that at
Yes,
that point?
it will absolutely be evaluated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Secretary of State. Thank you for joining us. I'm really concerned about the state of local journalism. As a former local journalist myself, I mentioned at the start of this meeting, I worked for the BBC and ITV in a previous life. Nowadays, many local newspapers have closed. Those that are left have a skeletal staff, maybe one person running a newsroom. Very difficult to keep on top of local stories. And one of the things that needs to be protected, in my view, is BBC local radio and television services. I'll use an example, recent example from yesterday. BBC Essex, the local radio station for that county, covered the memorial service of David Amos in a minute-by-minute coverage. It was impressive and can't be done by any other broadcaster. A commercial operator simply wouldn't do it. And that's the role that these services can provide if done well. And I have Radio Devon and Spotlight in my patch that hold me to account, and that's valuable. It's a bit weird being the other side of the microphone nowadays, but it's important. Yet, whenever the axe is wielded at the BBC, it's the services closest to those who pay the licence fee that always seem to face the salami slicer first. In your discussions with the BBC about the future of the corporation, how much is local radio, local television featured? And what are your thoughts on, in any discussions about the future policy, the future framework of the BBC, protecting those services that can't be provided commercially?
So, thank you. I don't know if you're aware, but I wrote an op-ed recently on the importance of local journalism because you're quite right, local journalism plays an important role, not just in, you gave a really sad example of David's funeral, but there are many people within society who actually depend on their local newspapers, their local TV channels to know what's happening locally and to know what's going on in their community. And they're a really important, cohesive element of local communities and what happens, even on a wider basis in local regions. And so it's incredibly important. And just, to put historically into context, just in case you're thinking, oh, well, you wrote that op-ed because you came into this job and you thought it was the right thing to do. I remember a number of years ago when I was probably a fairly new backbencher in my first few years, the BBC, and I can't remember the exact contents in which they were doing it, were actually, I think, doing something which was going to really crowd out local newspapers online in terms of dominance from BBC content. And I remember lots of local newspapers coming here down to Parliament, going to Downing Street, coming to talk to MPs, and campaigning then for local news content not to be crowded out by the kind of the bigger giants of public service broadcasting, because it is incredibly important to communities. So I think we've done quite a bit. You've asked a specific question. I can't talk about what we're doing in the discussions or what is being discussed.
Does it feature prominently in your discussions?
So I think the best way for me to answer your question is slightly similar to the way I answered Alex's question. What happens at a local level, regional and local level? Moving it out of London is really important to me, and it's part of the ethos within the department. So I think the best way for me to answer your question is to reassure you that regional and local news is certainly very important. We all know...
You have an opportunity through these discussions you're having with the BBC to say to them that the service is closest to those who pay for them, those that aren't already in London, those that are based in places like Plymouth, in Bristol, Southampton and other places, should be protected because they are closest and reflecting the communities of which pay the licence fee in the first place. Surely that must be featuring in your discussions with the BBC.
It very much features in our discussions and ongoing discussions. Obviously, I can't talk to you about what we're discussing at the moment, but very much that features. Local news, local television actually features very much as part of the discussion.
Isn't it sad that you mentioned about local papers coming to Westminster many years ago? I would love to know how many of those local newspapers still exist.
Well, actually, it's interesting because the one I was campaigning for has since gone.
And local newspapers in my region have closed in the last couple of years as well.
Well, we know, so this is one of the... So sustainability of the press and local news is an issue which is something I think is incredibly important. I think we've lost, is it 30% of journalists over the last 10 years? So I think, journalism as a career, news reporting as an important function of society is obviously against what's coming down, via the online platforms such as Facebook, which kind of is competing in terms almost of, carrying news and information. We're in that kind of environment now where local news and news in itself and journalism as a profession, and therefore our democracy is kind of slightly undermined, because what do we depend on as a democracy to inform us and to provide us with the news? Very much journalism and very much local news. And I think sustainability of the press is going to be very much an issue that's going to come on the horizon in the future.
Now, we discussed, and other colleagues have brought up during this session, about potential thoughts about bias and things like that when it comes to the BBC. Do you have the same concerns about local services in the BBC than you do, for example, some national services and local and national output from the BBC? Do you think there is a bias there too?
So look, because we're in discussions at the moment, I think all I'm going to say is that the BBC accept they have a problem with impartiality. They're the BBC's words, not mine. They have a problem with impartiality. They haven't said we have a problem with impartiality in London. They've said they have a problem with impartiality within the BBC. And therefore, I think just, taking that a step further, I would imagine the answer to your question is yes. But that's based on what the BBC have said, not what I'm saying.
One of the things that was introduced by one of your predecessors in the department was the Local Democracy Reporting Service. A fantastic scheme that basically means that there are journalists still going to council meetings to pick up on those Jackie Weaver moments that I think we've all found really engaging.
Thanks, Jackie Weaver.
But they after the demise of local newspapers who used to go to these meetings, used to sit through endless planning,
hours and hours.
Consultations, things like that, local democracy reporting, the scheme itself, plays a crucial role. Do you think that will take a stronger role? Could that be enhanced in the future?
So yes, and I don't see why it couldn't be or shouldn't be. And I remember, that was the training ground, wasn't it, for journalists to go and sit in those village halls night after night, reporting the minutes of those meetings to their local newspaper the next day. I mean, gosh, it sounds, literally harking back to a time which makes you feel very old. That doesn't exist anymore. But I think that there is, and I think it happens to a degree through citizen journalism, but the monitoring of citizen journalists and the misinformation, disinformation, bias, kind of that whole issue is something which I think needs to be questioned. But yeah, local democracy, local reporting, yes, I think what we need to see actually is a revival. Can we have a revival in journalism? Because they were the good old days, if you like, of honest reporting which wasn't overlaid with a filter of opinion, which I think is something that we see a lot of now.
Finally, from me, earlier this year, you told the Telegraph the BBC needs a less elitist and less snobbish approach to recruitment. I'm sitting in front of you in this committee today. I'm a Conservative MP. I wasn't educated privately. I didn't bother with the university. I did spend 7 years at BBC, where I became one of the youngest managers in BBC local radio. Now you've got your feet under the table, a bit more into the role, and presumably met more people from the BBC. Do you still feel the same way about that?
Well, I think the figures speak for themselves. So the number of people they employ from professional and managerial backgrounds is, I think it's at 70-something%. The number of people from working class backgrounds, I think, is 20-something%. So I think actually that could be Channel 4, but I think I can get them up actually while we're talking. I think the figures speak for themselves, and the BBC accept it's an issue that they have to deal with. So, again, that's very much the ethos that I've brought. If you were to say what changes have you brought as Secretary of State to the Department, that's very much it for me. It's about ensuring that everybody from every background has access to the arts, whether it's music, it's theatre, it's sport, it's whatever it is, because it's different now to how it was. So, when I grew up in the 60s, somebody I grew up with on my very deprived council estate in Liverpool went on to be Cher's music producer. And people went into the theatre. If you wanted to, you could. I myself I remember my drama teacher, Miss Lyons, getting me an audition at the Elliott Clark School of Dance and Drama and telling me about it on the Saturday morning, but I couldn't go because I didn't have the bus fare to get there. But, if you could get the bus fare to get there, and if you could do these, you could move on. The kids from where I grew up now would never dream of being a journalist. They wouldn't think there was an opportunity for them theatres to them are not places that they go to. Equally with museum, with any element of the creative industries of the arts, they just don't think they're open to them for the opportunities of employment or enjoyment. And that's something that we very much have to change. And I would bring journalism into there also. So, and the BBC, it is doing work on apprentices. As part of our discussions, I hope we get to a position where it's going to do more. Very interesting what ITV are doing in considering reopening a training school for apprentices. Getting people from those backgrounds into those sectors is incredibly important, and anything I can do while I'm Secretary of State to facilitate that, I will do.
Thank you. Just to follow up just on the question of the local democracy report, that obviously is a BBC decision, it's BBC funded. So how will you actually see that be expanded? Is that something you're going to be discussing with the BBC? Is that going to be a prerequisite of the licence fee settlement?
I think that's something that's going to be part of the midterm review in the framework agreement. I don't think it's coming in as part of the discussions on the licence fee, but I think it's something we will when we start the midterm review discussions next year, we will be discussing with them.
You would want to see that included in the midterm
It's
review?
Incredibly important. Yeah. It's part of regional news, and it's part of of exactly what I've just spoken to that
Yes.
point, to getting people in.
I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to move on to John one second. Another point as well was the fact that you used London-centric quite often during your evidence today. Are you going to lead by example? Are we going to see DCMS, Sarah, for example? Are you going to move to, follow the example of the CMA, for instance, in its digital markets unit and move to the Treasury campus? Are we going to see DCMS, civil servants moving out of London?
You want me to?
No, it's the Secretary of State.
Okay.
Well, I see the civil service moving out of London.
Yeah, your civil service.
Well,
will you
that's
encourage
not my
it?
decision. I don't run the civil service. That's
Well,
Sarah runs the department.
Do you want to see that happen? Would you encourage that?
So I think it's happening in a huge number of departments, and I think moving out of London is a really good thing. So
DCMS.
I think we do have.
Yeah, we've opened an office in Manchester. We have employed staff in Manchester, and we are also looking...
Is that part of the digital markets unit in Manchester?
No, this is
Separate to
DCMS
that?
staff in an office in Manchester, and we're also exploring whether we can open in other locations as well. In particular, obviously, as a major economic department, we're clearly interested in becoming part of the government economic campus as well.
Thank you. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's stick with the BBC and broadcasting. I think it's worth remembering that BBC Director General is a former Conservative Party candidate. BBC Chair is a major donor to the Conservative Party. Now, I'm a journalist and I'm passionate about journalism. But you said you didn't know whether the BBC would still be in existence in 10 years' time. I thought that was an extraordinary thing to say. Do you really not know that the BBC will still be going in 10 years' time?
Well, I don't think it's an extraordinary answer. It was an extraordinary question, which was, do you think the licence fee will still be here in 10 years? How can I know?
I'm not talking about the licence fee, I'm talking about the BBC.
I'm telling you what the question was that I answered. And the question was, do you think the licence fee? And my answer was, how can I possibly know? I don't have a crystal ball. How do I even know if the BBC is going to be?
Well, actually, the exact quote I have it in front of me was, I can't look into the future. Will the BBC still be there in 10 years' time? I don't know. So you weren't talking just about the licence fee, but the existence of the corporation.
Well, I don't know, do I? Neither do you. Neither do any of us.
I think I would stake a significant amount of money on the BBC still being in existence in 10 years' time. It would be a tragedy were it not. But you said this soon after the Today presenter, Nick Robertson, a former chair of the Young Conservatives, I might add, had clashed with the Prime Minister. Now, you'll remember Mr Johnson tried to give one of his just a minute, incredibly long answers, and Nick Robinson stepped in. And the Times reported that you said Nick Robinson has cost the BBC a lot of money, which sounds threatening. Could you put on record what you meant by that?
Well, I didn't say that.
So the Times is wrong?
I didn't hear the interview. I didn't see the interview. I've never commented on what Nick Robinson said.
Well, that's very clear. So the Times has misreported that. You called the BBC...
Can I also just say, for the purpose of minute-taking on this meeting, I'm very sure the BBC will be here in 10 years.
Oh, really?
My point is...
That's the fastest U-turn I've ever heard, even by this government standards.
My point is that I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know any more than anybody else in this room.
Well, none of us are crystal balls. That's a truism. You called the BBC, as I say, left-wing, hypocritical, patronising, more in keeping with the Soviet-style country. Did you ever visit a Soviet-style country and watch the broadcasting there?
Yeah.
And you think it's like the BBC's?
I'm not going to ask questions about tweets that I posted 12 years ago.
That wasn't, well...
Whenever it was.
Maybe it's hard to keep track of your tweets, but it was quoted in quoted in the Daily Mail last month. Now, only the other day in your capacity...
It might have been quoted in the Daily Mail last month. That doesn't mean I posted it last month.
Not a hostile publication, though. Only the other day, in your capacity as Culture Secretary, you tweeted at Laura Kuenssberg, the BBC's political editor, and you attacked a tweet that she'd sent, and the word you used was ridiculous. Do you regret the fact that you tweeted at her?
I didn't tweet at her.
Well, you copied her in to the tweet.
I quote tweeted her, and my point was not that Laura's tweet was ridiculous. Laura is one of the best most professional journalist in the business, who has been here a very long time and is probably the best journalist in the business. What I was commenting on, but I realise that some people don't have the ability to interpret a short number of characters in the way that they're intended, which is actually the reason why I deleted it, and it is because what I was saying was that the message she had been sent, which she was quoting, was ridiculous. Not that law is ridiculous, but the message that she was quoting was ridiculous.
Well, actually, the wording used was that it is, you said, you must realise this is ridiculous. But regardless of the exact words that you used, in your capacity as Culture Secretary, given how much trouble you've got in over your tweets in the past, you must realise that it's inappropriate for you as Culture Secretary to be tackling the BBC's political editor about the content of either a report or one of her tweets.
Attack is a word you use a lot, and I wouldn't call it an attack at all.
All right, you called everyone who works at the Daily Mirror, presumably both women and men, bottom-feeding scum.
How many years ago was that?
That was 2013.
There you go, how many years ago was that?
There's a continuity, I think. I mean, unless you're saying that everything you've ever written, everything that you've ever said previously has to be discounted because there's a statute of limitations. I mean, we hear that for very young people. You know, teenagers, for example, are allowed to say things inappropriate. You weren't a teenager when you sent that. You've got a history of attacking journalists. I mean, I'll leave aside your testicle tweets because we discussed that quite recently. But you tweeted LBC's James O'Brien, as we know, calling him a public school posh boy F-wit, and that would fall into the category of abuse, would it not, under your own online safety legislation?
Chairman, I'm not going to answer any of these questions. I find them quite personal and attack. If you'd like me...
I would say just one thing. I did question John very closely on this. I think the one relevant point about this is the fact that you are Secretary of State, and should the online harms legislation come to pass in the way in which it seems it will come to pass, you will have enormous power at that point, particularly on sign-off and secondary legislative power. So I do think it is honestly, I think it's very credible.
I think it's important that perhaps I answer. The reason Mr. Nicholson is quite right. He asked me about the journalist tweets in the past, and I will answer that for the purpose of this committee. I sent that tweet when my daughter's neighbour told me a journalist was outside the house photographing her in the house and had followed her on a dog walk down a path. That was the mother that sent that tweet.
Yeah, but that was nothing to do with James O'Brien.
I know you don't want to hear my answer, but I request the right to give it.
It wasn't about James O'Brien.
That
was a different issue. That was a Mirror journalist, I think.
Order. The Secretary of State just answer the question.
I will answer that next. So that is why it was the mother, Nadine Dorries, who posted that tweet when my daughter's neighbour opposite said, I'm trying to ring your daughter, I'm trying to ring her. There's a journalist outside the house photographing her in the house, and he's just followed her on the dog walk. That's when I sent that tweet after that. So, and I think I would expect any mother, frankly, who was distressed to do that. On the James O'Brien tweet, I think
I think a lot of mothers sitting listening to this will not welcome the implication that because they're trying to protect their children, they're allowed to send abusive tweets. And I know you used that argument at a previous committee. But as I said, that's nothing to do with James O'Brien. So let's move on to your various
because we do know you love your pile-on tweets and what have you. So James O'Brien, I think if you search the number of times I've tweeted James O'Brien, I think you might find it's 2. If you search the number of times James O'Brien has persistently tweeted me, to the point where we had at my office a number of years ago, probably about 18 months, 2 years ago, had to write to Global complaining that his behaviour was stepping into the realms of harassment. That was at the point which I sent that tweet. If you search James O'Brien's tweets of me... I
have searched that because at the other committee...
Including the ones
at the other committee, you said that you'd responded to abuse from him, and I have actually searched that. And I can't find this abuse that you talk about. But I have found you asking for James O'Brien to get the sack. You also implied that he had mental health problems. You said, I don't think he's a well man. He needs removing from his platform abuse. And you said, separate tweet, you said, I've had to email his employer a number of times. Now, I don't think it's appropriate for you as a politician to be trying to get somebody the sack. But let's move on to another tweet that you sent.
Can I answer that point?
Please do.
So, Mr. Chairman, just what I'd say is that, along with a number of female politicians, I am subjected to a small number of men who do tweet about me obsessively, aggressively, and pleasantly, and James O'Brien is one of them.
Well, I can't find those tweets that you mentioned, but here's something that you did retweet about him. I'll quote it. I believe James O'Brien of LBC fame is a hate preacher, a liar, a misogynist, a UK hater, and an apologist for Islamic atrocities. You're in no position to talk about James O'Brien saying offensive things about you. You tweeted that. I mean, apart from being actionable and defamatory, it's grotesque. Well, I'm glad you agree.
I don't agree with you, and I have.
You think it's appropriate?
I haven't come here today to answer to tweets that I sent years ago. I do understand, the context in my role as a Secretary of State, but as I said, as a female politician,
nothing to do with being a female politician.
It's nothing to, as many females do, have to respond assertively to the numerous aggressive, unpleasant tweets. And I would, looking at your own tweet history, wouldn't say it was something to be particularly proud of either.
Oh, you'll find no abuse in my tweet history. Otherwise, I'm sure you'd have produced it today. I don't think it's a defence. There's no abuse in my tweet history. I don't think it's a defence to say because you're a woman, you're allowed to accuse people of being Islamic atrocity supporters. That does a grave disservice to women politicians. I suppose my point is, quite apart from the fact that you hold enormous power in this current role, do you think it's appropriate that somebody who behaves so consistently in an intemperate way should be in charge of online safety legislation in the way that you are going to be, because you have a pattern going back many, many years of saying things that are inappropriate, tweeting things that are inappropriate, and often deleting them?
I'm not going to answer that question. That's nothing to do with my role as Secretary of State or DCMS.
Well, I think it is. Chair.
Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Secretary of State, and congratulations on your appointment. You were talking earlier on about, which may have resonated with a number of people, about the need for those opportunities that were once there in the arts and in culture to be available to working class kids today. And my brother's experience would be very similar in that he is a professional actor, but he got his first opportunity through getting a discretionary grant from his local authority to be able to attend drama school. Would you support that kind of initiative to bringing back those kinds of opportunities through local authority funding to help talented working class kids to get into some of these top drama schools who these days often require a fee just to do an audition?
I think that's really important. How do we do it? Do we do it through local authority grant funding? Do we do it by setting a narrative that, I went to see the Young Vic this week, which does lots of outreach program to kids from underprivileged backgrounds. And in fact, I went to see a rehearsal and I went to speak to some of the young people working in the Young Vic, from costume to production to acting to mentoring programs. The theatres themselves were reaching out into those communities, and I think that's really...
There is a huge amount of cultural capital in a place like London, isn't there, for that kind of opportunity to happen for working class kids, which is not true in other parts of the country. It's not evenly distributed, is it?
No. I said that's exactly why I'm looking at things like Arts Council funding, which 40% of is spent on 6 million people in London, 60% is spent out in the regions. So it's looking at that balance and where the funding's spent and what's happening in terms of outreach programs. And so that's for me is one area that I'm looking at. But yeah, local authority funding. It's, you know, I've given, from the day I arrived to the department, and I think it was in my first all-staff address, an instruction that was every policy in this department which we sign off, everything we do needs to have a filter laid over the top of it. Does that help children, young people from socially deprived backgrounds to be able to access the areas of the department that we are responsible for, which includes both art, culture, theatre, digital, everything? Are we doing what we can to facilitate that? Because to me, that's what levelling up is about. It's about people.
That sounds very welcome, but of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Would you, commit to either coming and making a statement to the House or coming and before this committee to lay out, once you've had a chance to get your civil servants come up with the plans to achieve real results of that kind? And I know it doesn't happen overnight, but to show how you're going to do that. Would you commit to come forward with some kind of clear plan how you're going to do that?
Yeah, we're actually discussing that now.
Sarah, have you got a
yeah, I mean, obviously, kind of we're contributing to processes on levelling up going on across government, but also the Secretary of State has asked the department to work up how we can contribute to her goal, as well as thinking about it in everything that we do. So I'm sure we'd be happy to talk to the committee about it in future.
Can I ask you, have you had a chance to look at this committee's report on the economics of music streaming, which was concluded earlier this year? And do you agree with the committee about the need for action to help musicians?
So I have looked at it, and in fact, one of the first decisions I made was because one of your recommendations was the CMA look at the dominance of those three main music producers in the space. And so I've asked the CMA to look at that as a matter of priority, rather because of the kind of looking at the timescales that the CMA operate under, but also the IPO in terms of copyright issues, to look at that as well. And what I'm doing is, while that's happening, I'm kind of talking myself to lots of people in the sector, including not only artists, but to the other side as well. And in fact, I met a number of representatives just last week on behalf of artists and musicians. I'm quite shocked by some of the stories that they tell, in terms of, Diana Ross is still gigging to make money. And, some of the stories I heard, Seal, were just incredible. But what I am aware of, and I think you said it yourself in the report, that there is an issue that we have to be careful about what we do and what measures we do bring in, because we could actually impact on other musicians and hurt other musicians in the process. So we're looking very carefully at that, at what we do and how we do it, whilst the IPO are doing their work, while the CMA are doing theirs. We're also doing work within departments, and we've told the CMA to prioritise this recommendation in the report, and we'll see where we get to.
I'm glad that you've met with some artists, because often secretaries of states only get to meet with the big, umbrella bodies and so on. Would you be willing to meet with the Broken Record campaign, who run by Tom Gray? He's a fellow Merseysider, so you might have something in common there. Who's from Gomez, as well as the Musicians Union and the Ivors Academy and so on, to discuss their perspective on all of this, because I think sometimes it feels as if perhaps government doors are not as open to them as they might be to some of the larger players in this area. Would you be willing to meet with them?
Absolutely. And if you want to arrange that through the department, very happy to do it. In fact, I think they may already be in the system for a meeting arrangement. Well, can I just say, Mr. Chairman, do you have points of order in select committees?
Yeah, of course.
And Mr. Nicholson told me he never tweeted abuse. Having been the former Minister for Mental Health for 2 years, I do take objection to him in 2017 having tweeted that I was unstable.
Well, could I
find that highly
Chair,
this is yeah.
But he asked for evidence, so I thought I'd present it.
That's been put on the record.
We're
in a very limited time. Kevin Brennan. And then
I wonder if I might just pursue my line of questioning.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan, but I was asked the question, so I thought I should.
And I'm sure that there'll be plenty more tweeting later on. But I just wanted to get to some policy substance. It obviously is what I'm driving at, and I'm glad you've made that commitment to meet those representatives. Now you'll be aware that I've got a private members bill, which is has its second reading in the House of Commons, which is based largely on the recommendations that this select committee made in relation to the economics of music streaming, and it'll be published. So I'm aware you haven't had a chance to read it fully. It'll be published overnight and be available. And the government so far indicated it's not inclined to support any legislation in this area at this time. I acknowledge it hasn't ruled it out entirely, but will you undertake to have a look at the bill when it's published?
No, I'm aware. I am aware of it. I'm aware of your bill.
And to be a champion for musicians, songwriters, and other creators in the time you have in that role, however long or short that might be. We've discussed the lifespan of secretaries of state, but are you prepared to commit to the
committee? You might
be
disappointed with me. I might be here for a while.
Well, if you become a champion for musicians, songwriters, and creators, and you produce far more opportunities for working class children in the arts and culture, then you won't have any argument from me if it's more than a one-night stand, which I'm afraid that's what it's been from the government for the last decade or so, as far as being Secretary of State.
Honestly, I totally understand that, and I totally get that, and I know that your commitment to, I'm aware of your commitment to both musicians, struggling musicians, and those musicians who are not being paid, and I'm aware of your bill, and happy to look. I'm happy to give you time on this, because I should declare my interest when I say secretary. I know we began this at the beginning, but I am an author, and I actually really understand the concept of being paid for content. And because I'm quite lucky, my books sell quite well, and I have no complaints, but I'm aware of many, because I also, work in that field, I'm aware of many authors who struggle incredibly, both to be paid for their content and to sustain the right amount of ongoing royalties and payments they are paid. I know it's a different world, but the principle is the same, and I'm very aware of it. So I'm really happy to give you time on this and talk to you about this.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Secretary of State. Can I just ask you, Sarah, I'm sorry, this is slightly offbeat.
Sorry, order. Just to specify at this point, Sarah Connolly has joined us as Director of Security and Online Harms at the Directorate.
I should say then,
DCMS.
So I should say Permanent Secretary rather than Sarah in that case, if there are two Sarahs in front of us. What do you think of yourself as part of the blob? and do you own a Peloton exercise bike? I mean, on a serious point, what did you make of what Paul Dacre said about you to the press following his withdrawal from the appointment process for Chair of Ofcom?
I think the only thing that I would say in response to that question is that I'm really proud of what everybody in DCMS does to support ministers. I think they're an incredibly professional department. I think they work exceptionally hard. They're very, very committed to what they do. I know that that's how the Secretary of State feels, and how the former Secretary of State felt about the support that they
I was going to ask, do you agree with that, Secretary of State?
So can I just say, for the record, Sarah and the civil servants of my department, absolutely 100% support for Sarah. Can I just say that I think that comment about Sarah exercising on her Peloton, which is the subject of many jokes in the department, there are many male permanent secretaries and who went for their jog each morning, or for their cycle ride, or walked their dog. Nobody has anything to say about that.
Do you think Paul Dacre is a misogynist then?
Okay. Order. Sorry, Kevin, we're going to have to move on from there. There is such a thing as, obviously, they would probably be described as mammals, wouldn't they? The male permanent Secretary of States who are going cycling. Just to
reiterate, just briefly introduce the final point, leaving that aside, which was on the online harms as we move into it. It is a 1 minute question. I just asked Secretary of State, you may not have had the chance, it's only just come out, but there's an all-party parliamentary group on the Future of Work report about algorithms and their impact and the harm they can bring to people's well-being at work. And I would just ask if you would undertake to make sure that you get familiarise yourself with its recommendations and perhaps incorporate some of them, if you can, into your thinking on the online harms bill.
Okay, that's not a question, but okay.
Well,
Alex Davis-Jones.
Online safety bill. You've mentioned yourself this morning that you have been a victim of misogyny, targeted harassment, abuse. We know that women and girls are subject to this on a daily basis. It's horrendous. You're in a position of power now, and as a victim of this yourself, what can you do as a solution to stop this happening and to protect women and girls from this atrocious abuse online?
So I think if you look at the online harms bill and the measures we're taking in terms of, so there are 3 buckets to the harms. Protection of children and young people is the most important. That is absolutely kind of the fundamental, has to be right element of the bill, protecting children and young people. But the other 2 buckets are legal content, illegal but harmful content, and misogyny, harassment, ongoing abuse, something I've been subjected to, since 2000 and whenever it was, when Twitter launched and social media first launched. And it always tends to be, particularly with female MPs, it's usually just, a few who continue, the unpleasant output. So that will be, if it wanders in, I'm going to ask Sarah at the end, Sarah number 2, she will qualify anything that I'm saying, because Sarah's been working on this bill since its origination. So that will all be captured in there, because that is legal for someone to tweet, but it's harmful. And if it's harmful and it causes psychological harm or personal injury, which isn't so relevant, but if it causes psychological harm, then we will expect platforms to take action immediately in accordance, because if you look at the terms and conditions of these platforms, they are themselves arbiters of ensuring that people don't suffer from psychological harm or physical or any other kind of harm.
Before you bring Sarah in, Sarah Connolly, the Prime Minister told the Liaison Committee that he would be willing to ensure that violence against women and girls would be added to the face of the bill, explicitly recognising the impact that women and girls experience online.
It's in the scope of the bill already. Right. It's in there already. And can I just say, Alex, just to reassure you again, so when I arrived in the department 8 weeks ago, the bill was in its draft form, which I know is what you've all seen and what you've worked on. It's in a different place now to what it was 8 weeks ago. A huge amount of work has been done, and more work is to be done. I'm waiting for the recommendations from your subcommittee, recommendations from the joint committee. There's more work to be done. It's going to be in a much tougher and stronger place, particularly around protecting children and young people, but also about a very point that you've mentioned about making sure that those people who, the pylons, which are, very often on women, the abuse, which is focused very often on women, the harassment focused towards women. I'm very aware of that. I'm probably the only Secretary of State who's, as aware of that, totally aware of that, having been subjected to it myself. So, and the online platforms have the ability to stop that now. They just choose not to. This bill will ensure that they do.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that the bill will be in a different place in 8 weeks' time, because at present some of the platforms that you've mentioned fall into category 1, but the vast majority of platforms don't fall into this category 1, and they contain the majority of misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, abuse. The platforms like Telegram, OnlyFans, 8chan, 4chan, BitChute, the list goes on and on and on. And these platforms currently would be out of scope of the bill.
So I'm going to ask Sarah Connolly to come in, because my information is that the majority of abuse actually takes place on the main platforms. And so those platforms that are in category 1, which is why they're in category 1, because that's where most of the abuse takes place. So this isn't a Christmas tree bill. It isn't a bill where you can just put everything on it. But my information is that the majority, and this has been evaluated and looked at very carefully, that the majority of abuse takes place on the category 1 platforms. Sarah, would you like to take that over?
Sure. So I think the Secretary of State's absolutely right. There's a high risk or high reach point that we want to make sure that we capture. But that is a test, high risk or high reach. And so I think quite a lot of the platforms that you just name checked actually would fall into scope of the bill, certainly as user-generated content platforms. Now, whether or not they are category 1 or not, and therefore subject to whether or not the legal but harmful provisions apply to them, will be the subject of kind of Ofcom and the department working together to determine what should fall into that. But I think certainly some of the platforms that you name-checked would merit looking carefully in that respect.
Nobody wants a Christmas tree bill. I think we want a bill that's actually going to work. That's the
So
worry.
There's no point taking a bill to Parliament that isn't going to work. What's the point? We're not putting all this hard work into trying to make the online environment safer, to protect women and girls, particularly to protect children and young people. We're not putting all this work into this to go to Parliament to find out it isn't going to work. That's absolutely what we're trying to do, which is why I don't think the bill in the form that it was, the draft form, would have been something that I would have wanted to take to Parliament in the form that it was. So we've done a huge amount of work since I've arrived. I think it's in a much stronger place now, awaiting the recommendations from the Joint Committee, because there's a huge amount of expertise in the Lords on this, waiting for the Joint Committee recommendations, your subcommittee recommendations, and there will be even more work done. But my objective is to make sure we get this bill to the House in March as well. So time frames are limited, but we're in a very much different place than we were before.
So we're now at March for the bill, not Christmas.
So I know the Prime Minister said that he had
it was a very difficult day, so I do understand.
It's not that it was a difficult day, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure. The Joint Committee then said they wouldn't be providing their recommendations until the 10th of December. And as the House rises on the 20th of December, it was just impossible.
Yes.
If we were going to do justice to the Joint Committee and we were going to get their recommendations duly considered and, if possible, included in the bill, it just wasn't impossible to do it in those 10 days.
Sort of the theme of the moment about Twitter, I did point that out on Twitter almost straight away, that it was now impossible.
The wonderful Twitter.
Yeah, it was now impossible in order to do that at that time. So, but the more realistic one is March for the timing of the bill. We're conscious of time, yes? Great, thank you. In terms of other things that the Prime Minister said on this particular bill...
Can I just say, if we can get it sooner, we'll get it sooner. It depends on what the recommendations are from the Joint Committee.
Normally 3 months is about the working sort of premise on joint committees, and then the bill comes before the House. And now the Prime Minister said about cyber flashing, wanted to see that effectively specifically outlawed, potentially in the bill. Do you support that?
I certainly do. Not only cyber flashing, I'm not even sure if cyber flashing is the term you use to this new software which takes photographs only of women and then transposes that image into that woman being naked and then circulates it on the internet. I'm not sure if that comes under cyber flashing, but my information is that much of that is actually now within the scope of the bill and included in the work that we're doing. But again, I'd ask Sarah Connolly to comment on that.
Sure. So there's obviously Law Commission work in this space as well, the intimate image abuse. There are, and I know that the Ministry of Justice is thinking about the various offences in that space as recommended by the Law Commission.
Yeah, we're aware of the Law Commission. Are you saying that effectively it's going to be left to the Ministry of Justice, or will it be in this bill?
So if we can bring it into scope, so we are looking, as the Secretary says, at the scope generally. There are certainly offences in this space around intimate image sharing, and that is with the law. That is with the Ministry of Justice. Excuse me. The sort of the advantage of this bill is, as soon as something is made illegal, it is obviously naturally brought into scope because of the illegality regulatory system that we have. So as soon as we take a decision that we're going to make something an offence, it then is incumbent upon the platforms to remove it because it would at that point be illegal. So those are the mechanisms that we're looking at in this space.
Will there be criminal sanction against platforms that effectively persistently fail in their duty of care?
Absolutely, yes. And the draft bill, I think, put criminal sanctions in at 2 years. I am looking at shortening that very dramatically down to hopefully 3 months, because it is the case that those online platforms can actually change their behaviours now. They can comply with their own terms and conditions now. They can remove harmful algorithms right now. They don't need to wait for this bill to come to the floor of the House to change the way they behave. Therefore, they don't need 2 years. And as I've said before, rather than Facebook putting 20,000 engineers onto the metaverse, they really should be putting those engineers onto actually making their platforms comply with their own terms and conditions and removing that misogynistic, abusive, harassing, removing algorithms that direct children to suicide chat rooms or to pro-anorexia rooms or whatever else, the other harms that these algorithms cause. They should be doing that right now.
So, criminal sanction, do you want that as effectively primary legislation on the face of the bill, or do you want it as put in place of potential secondary legislation at your discretion 3 months later?
So that's a change that I brought in since I arrived, and I'm awaiting advice and from Parliamentary Council on that. So we're looking at that.
You're looking at primary and not just secondary
I want
legislation.
it to be on the face of the bill, when it comes to
That's
the
really helpful. Thank you for that. Just in terms of scrutiny, ongoing scrutiny of the bill, we only got a few moments, so we'll try and deal with this as quickly as possible. We know that you stated in front of the Joint Committee that you thought there was going to need for an ongoing presence as such. What were you thinking there? Were you thinking in terms of effectively a new committee being set up, or were you thinking actually whether or not actually the committees of the Lords and the Commons effectively could do the job of that, which we do already?
So this bill, when it becomes an act, is there are a number of issues which kind of like came together really. The first is that the powers invested in the Office of Secretary of State in this bill are substantial, as you have alluded to, Chair. The powers invested in an independent organisation like Ofcom are, again, substantial. And I'm aware from feedback that I've had from some parliamentarians that makes some parliamentarians quite uncomfortable in terms of the number of powers divested, both in my office and in Ofcom. And added to that, there is the possibility that online platforms, the moment this becomes an act, will start changing the goalposts and shifting the landscape. So that the regulatory framework which we give to Ofcom no longer becomes fit for purpose, because they will change how they operate and change their terms and conditions. And so how a committee is formed, what committee is, the processes by that happens, obviously is all down to the Speaker. So, but from my perspective, I'm exploring the option of a joint committee which involves the House of Lords to provide an ongoing scrutiny to reassure parliamentarians in regard to scrutiny of the powers. But I mean scrutiny on, now I'm not going to say weekly, again, it's down to the House, not me, but a very, very regular basis, a substantial scrutiny, both of Ofcom and its new regulatory framework, and of the platforms, and as to how they operate, and to the Office of Secretary of State in terms of deploying secondary powers. So that, you asked what my thinking was, that is my thinking. And as I said earlier in one of my answers, there is a huge amount of expertise in the Lords on issues.
Is it your plan to put that in primary legislation on the face of the bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, well, again, you're asking me questions. Well, this is work in process.
Yes.
I'm looking at if that's possible.
That's quite extraordinary, because your own officials have used the example of the Human Rights Act, but obviously that was brought forward as separate legislation. So what you're proposing to do is effectively bring about a new committee in Parliament on the face of a bill for the first time in our constitutional history.
Well, this bill is nothing if it is not novel and groundbreaking and legislating for a sector and an environment that has never been legislated for before in terms of monitoring online platforms. So I want to pass it over to Sarah Connolly, sorry.
You've got 1 minute.
I think I'm correct in saying actually the ISC is on the face of legislation. I think it was brought in 1994, and then the...
No, but it's not a parliamentary committee. Yeah, it's completely different. It's a parliamentary committee. The difficulties that we have, and probably many other parliamentarians would have Secretary of State would say respectfully, if you like a sort of wrapping up moment, because we're going to adjourn in a second because of votes, is the fact that it feels as if, frankly, this is an innovation that potentially was put up with very little thought process behind it, and then effectively has led to a situation in which there is going to be a really novel change to the way in which ministers and parliamentarians interact with one another. And I would urge you to think very strongly and very carefully on that going forwards, because what is being proposed, at least in sort of proto form, is effectively potentially damaging to parliamentary scrutiny rather than enhancing it. And that's something which my committee feels the same about, as do I have to say, speaking of the other place, the noble Lords would think about that. So I'd like you to take that away today, and maybe perhaps we can discuss that offline at a later date.
Well, I absolutely happy to discuss at a later date. I'm not someone who's going to resist change because this isn't something that's not been done before. And
resisted over is not democratic, though.
Well, I think it's more democratic to have it. I mean, this doesn't take away from what this committee does or the scrutiny that this committee applies, or indeed your subcommittee. It's just a platform to harness also the expertise in the House of Lords and to provide an ongoing, regular scrutiny of the bill once it becomes an act, and is there as a permanent watching brief on the behaviour of platforms.
You mean like a select committee, like a parliamentary select committee?
Well, it's
Permanent
a joint
watching
committee.
If you get to say
Okay. We're just about to have votes, so I'm going to adjourn now. And the bell goes at that point. Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Thank you very much, Sarah Healy and Sarah Connolly, for your evidence today. Order, order.
Indeed.